Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was the middle of the night, and Jason had just finished his shift at the diner in the small, isolated town where he lived. The long stretch of road that ran through the county was quiet, shrouded in darkness, with only the occasional flicker of streetlights illuminating the endless expanse. His truck rumbled along the highway, the kind of noise that always made him feel a little less alone, despite the isolation. As he drove, he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. A figure. A person standing by the side of the road, their thumb raised in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. At first, Jason thought nothing of it. People hitchhiked all the time, but this was different. This person wasn't even trying to make eye contact. They stood unnervingly still, their head hung low, obscured by the shadows of their dark hoodie. The truck slowed, and Jason, feeling a strange pull of obligation, decided to stop. His headlights cut through the night, illuminating the figure. The person raised their head slowly, revealing pale skin and hollow eyes. A chill crept down his spine, but he quickly brushed it off. He couldn't be rude, after all, and there were no other cars on the road for miles. "You need a ride?" Jason called out through the open window, his voice a little more nervous than he wanted it to be. The figure nodded silently and climbed into the passenger seat without a word. Jason tried to keep his composure as he started driving again, keeping his eyes on the road while the silence hung thick in the air. Minutes passed. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the asphalt, and Jason began to feel a creeping unease. The hitchhiker hadn't said a single word. Not a hello, not a thank you. Jason tried to glance over at them, but the person's face remained hidden in shadow, their hoodie still pulled over their head. It almost seemed like they were trying to avoid being seen. "Where are you headed?" Jason asked, desperate to break the silence. His voice came out a little too loud, but he hoped it would ease the tension. The hitchhiker didn't answer. Instead, they shifted slightly in their seat, but their face remained hidden. Jason felt his heart race as his foot pressed harder on the gas. Something about the situation wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He tried again. "You okay? You don't seem like you're from around here." The figure suddenly shifted in the seat, turning just enough to face him. Jason's breath caught in his throat as he saw the hitchhiker's eyes, sunken and hollow, like two empty sockets staring back at him. Their face was too pale, almost as if it had been drained of color, and there was something deeply unsettling about their stillness. Jason's grip tightened on the steering wheel, and a lump formed in his throat. He was trying to make sense of what he was seeing, but it didn't add up. Why hadn't they spoken? Why didn't they even seem human? As the truck sped down the empty road, Jason caught a glimpse of something strange in the reflection of the rearview mirror, the silhouette of a figure standing in the distance, watching them. His heart skipped a beat. How had someone gotten there so quickly? It was impossible. He was the only one on the road. Suddenly, the hitchhiker leaned forward, their cold breath chilling Jason's ear. "You should turn back," they whispered, the words so soft yet unnervingly clear. Jason froze, panic bubbling up in his chest. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror again, but there was no one there anymore. He glanced at the hitchhiker, whose face was now mere inches from his own. Without thinking, Jason slammed on the brakes. The truck screeched to a halt, the headlights illuminating the figure who had been standing behind them just moments ago. Only it wasn't a person anymore. It was just a dark, twisted shape, as if the very essence of the night itself had manifested into something grotesque and unnatural. Jason didn't wait. He threw open the door and bolted into the night, his heart pounding in his chest. As he ran, he could feel the eyes of the creature on him, its presence pressing down like a weight. He glanced back one final time before diving into the woods, and there, standing by the truck, was the hitchhiker, motionless, just staring at him. Jason never returned to that road again. And though he couldn't explain it, he knew one thing for sure. That night, he had picked up something that wasn't human, and it hadn't been alone.
Story number 2.
Late one autumn evening, Alex was driving home from a weekend getaway with friends. The small two-lane highway stretched endlessly before him, twisting and winding through dense trees, the kind of rural road that seemed to vanish into nowhere. The sun had long set, leaving the night thick with fog. He didn't mind. He liked the peace, the isolation. It made the drive feel more personal, almost meditative. But something felt off that night. It started with a flicker of movement on the side of the road. A figure, obscured by the fog, appeared almost out of nowhere. At first, Alex thought it was just a deer or some other animal, but the shape began to move. And it didn't move like any animal he knew. It was too deliberate, too human. He slowed the car as he got closer, the headlights slicing through the dense fog. The figure didn't seem to notice him at first, but as Alex approached, it slowly turned its head toward the vehicle. It was a woman, tall, dressed in tattered clothes, with long dark hair falling over her face, obscuring her features. Alex felt a chill creep up his spine. There was something about her that felt wrong. She stood perfectly still, her body rigid, as though she were waiting for something, or someone. He hesitated. Should he stop? Help her? It was a strange part of town, and it didn't seem like anyone would pass by soon. Alex wrestled with his decision, but curiosity won out, and he pulled over. The woman didn't speak as he rolled down the window. She didn't move either, just stared at him with eyes he couldn't quite see, hidden beneath the tangled strands of her hair. For a long moment, there was only silence, the oppressive quiet of the fog wrapping around them. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, trying to mask the tremor in his voice. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she lifted a hand and pointed to the forest across the road. Alex followed her gaze, but saw nothing, only trees shrouded in mist. "Do you need a ride?" he asked again, this time more urgently. The silence felt suffocating, and the woman's strange behavior was unnerving. She didn't answer, but she nodded slowly once, as if she understood his question. Alex quickly unlocked the passenger door, and the woman, without saying a word, slid into the seat beside him. She smelled faintly of damp earth, like she had been wandering the woods for days. He tried not to think too much about it, focusing on the road instead. For the next several miles, she remained completely still, her eyes fixed on the fog outside the car. Alex tried to make small talk, but she didn't respond. It was like she wasn't even there. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Alex pulled up to the only gas station on the stretch of road. It was dark, the lights flickering as though they were struggling against the night. "Do you need anything?" Alex asked, glancing over at the woman. But when he turned to look, the seat beside him was empty. She was gone. His breath caught in his throat as he scanned the interior of the car. The door was still locked. His heart pounded in his chest as he turned to the gas station, looking for any sign of her. But there was nothing. No sign of her walking away. No footprints in the gravel. It wasn't until the next morning when Alex went to fill up his tank that he learned the chilling truth. The gas station clerk, a young man with tired eyes, gave him an odd look when Alex mentioned the woman. "Are you sure?" the clerk asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "You're not the first to see her." Alex frowned, confused. "There's a woman who haunts this stretch of highway," the clerk explained. "She died in a crash up there a few years ago, right near that spot where you picked her up. People have seen her standing on the side of the road ever since, but no one who stopped for her has ever seen her leave." Alex didn't say another word. He left the gas station quickly, the horrifying realization sinking in. The woman he had picked up that night wasn't a lost traveler. She had been something else, something that had been waiting for him. And now he knew she was still out there, waiting for the next driver foolish enough to stop. Another story begins in the dead of night. A young man named Tom, eager to get home after a long, exhausting drive, was cruising down an old highway that led to the mountains. The kind of highway that wasn't used much anymore, the road forgotten by time, but still well known by those who lived nearby. It was a place that carried an odd sort of unease to it, but Tom had driven it many times, and it had always felt peaceful. But tonight, it was different. As he rounded a sharp corner, he noticed something ahead in the distance. An old, rusty car pulled over on the shoulder. It looked abandoned, but something about it made Tom uneasy. There was a flicker of light inside, the soft glow of a flashlight. He slowed down, his curiosity piqued. A man stood by the car, waving his arms. He looked disheveled, his clothes torn, and his eyes wide with panic. "Can you help me, please?" The man shouted as Tom rolled down the window. His voice was trembling with fear, and his hands were shaking as he pointed toward the woods. "I've been stuck here for hours. There's something out there. Something in the trees. I saw it. You have to help me." Tom felt a pang of doubt. It was a quiet night, no other cars around, and the man's wild, frantic energy seemed off, like he wasn't entirely himself. But Tom couldn't leave him out there alone. "I'll give you a ride to the nearest town," Tom said, trying to sound reassuring. "Get you some help." The man hesitated for a moment, then nodded frantically, almost as though he was relieved. But as the man climbed into the car, something in Tom's gut twisted. He looked in the rearview mirror, and that's when he saw it. Someone was standing in the trees, just beyond the edge of the road. The silhouette was tall, impossibly tall, and it didn't move. It was just there, watching. A strange, hollow feeling washed over Tom as he turned his gaze back to the road. The man, still shaking, didn't seem to notice anything. "Thank you for this. You don't know how much this means to me," he murmured quietly. Tom glanced over at him and suddenly froze. The man wasn't looking at him anymore. He was staring straight ahead, eyes wide, pupils dilated. He had a strange grin creeping up his face. "Get out of the car," the man whispered, his voice suddenly low and menacing. Tom's blood ran cold. He slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt. The man opened the door before Tom could even react and disappeared into the darkness. But as Tom looked into the rearview mirror, he saw that the figure in the woods was gone. And then, in the distance, he saw it. The abandoned car, still parked by the side of the road. Tom didn't wait around to figure out the details. He sped off into the night, not stopping until he reached the safety of a well-lit gas station. But the memory of those dark eyes and the haunting grin that had spread across the stranger's face never left him. He didn't know what he had picked up that night, but he was sure of one thing: it wasn't human.
Story number 3.
One winter evening, Emma decided to take a long walk through the quiet, snow-covered streets of her small town. It had been a stressful week, and she thought some fresh air would clear her mind. The streets were eerily empty, with only the sound of her boots crunching in the snow breaking the silence. The moonlight reflected off the snow, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the ground. As she walked down a familiar street, she noticed an old house on the corner. It was the kind of house that people whispered about, the one everyone avoided, with darkened windows and a sagging porch. It had been abandoned for years, ever since the tragic incident with the family that once lived there. Rumors had circulated that the house was haunted, but Emma had always found that hard to believe. Still, tonight, the house seemed different. The air around it felt thicker, like something was watching her. She paused in front of the house, staring at the broken windows. Something caught her eye, a faint glow flickering from within. For a moment, she thought it was just a reflection from the streetlight, but the glow pulsed steadily, like a candle flickering in a dark room. Emma felt an inexplicable urge to approach. As she took a few tentative steps toward the porch, the door creaked open. She froze, heart racing. She hadn't seen anyone go in or out of the house in years. She stood there for a long moment, her breath forming clouds in the cold air, waiting to see if anyone would come out. But no one did. The door remained ajar, the glow still faintly visible inside. Against her better judgment, Emma stepped closer. The air around her grew colder, and the sense of being watched intensified. She could almost hear faint whispers coming from inside the house, though when she strained her ears, there was nothing but the quiet hiss of the wind. She reached the door and, after another brief hesitation, pushed it open. It creaked loudly, as if protesting her entry. The room beyond was dimly lit, but Emma could make out shapes, old furniture covered in dust, a cracked mirror on the wall. The faint glow seemed to come from the far corner of the room, and as she walked toward it, her footsteps echoing in the silence, the temperature seemed to drop even further. And then she saw it. In the corner, sitting on a rocking chair, was a figure, a woman. Her back was to Emma, but the faint glow seemed to emanate from her body, lighting up the room in an unsettling way. The woman's hair hung long and limp, and her clothes were old-fashioned, worn, faded, and torn. Emma's breath caught in her throat, her instincts screaming at her to turn and run. But her legs were frozen, as if the very sight of the woman had paralyzed her. The woman slowly turned her head, and Emma saw her face, pale, almost translucent, with hollow eyes staring back at her. The woman's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Instead, Emma felt a strange pressure in her chest, as if the woman's gaze was forcing the air out of her lungs. She wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't move. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the glow flickered out, and the room was plunged into darkness. Emma stumbled back, finally able to break free from the hold of whatever was in that chair. She turned and ran as fast as she could, not daring to look back, the sound of her pounding footsteps mingling with the whispers she could still hear in the distance. She never went near that house again. In another part of the world, there was a small village, tucked between mountains, surrounded by dense forests. It was a place that seemed untouched by time. No one visited unless they had a reason to, and the people who lived there kept to themselves. It was known for its strange customs and its belief in things that most people would consider superstition. One particularly cold and windy night, a traveler named Greg, lost after a long hike through the mountains, stumbled into the village. His eyes were bloodshot, his body exhausted, and his supplies nearly gone. As he reached the village center, he saw a lone light shining from one of the small cottages. Grateful for the warmth, he knocked at the door, hoping to find some help. An old woman answered. Her face was wrinkled, her gray hair twisted into a knot, and she looked at him with piercing eyes. "You shouldn't have come here," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of years of wisdom. Greg, desperate and not fully understanding her tone, stepped forward, begging for food and shelter. The woman looked at him for a moment, then sighed. "You can stay for the night," she said, "but you mustn't go outside after dark. There are things in these woods that hunger." Greg nodded gratefully and followed her inside. The cottage was warm and the fire crackled in the hearth. The old woman offered him a bowl of soup and he accepted eagerly. They spoke little as he ate, but the woman's presence was strangely comforting. As the night wore on, Greg began to feel drowsy, his exhaustion overtaking him. The old woman stood up suddenly, her voice firm. "You should rest, but remember, do not go outside after dark." Greg, barely able to keep his eyes open, nodded again. He found a small cot near the fire and laid down, falling into a deep sleep. Hours later, he woke to the sound of distant howling. It sounded almost human, but there was something off about it. He lay there, wide awake now, listening to the eerie noise coming from the woods. It grew louder, closer. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat up, suddenly unsure of where he was or what he had gotten himself into. Then he remembered the old woman's warning. With a shaking hand, he pushed the covers aside and crept to the window. Peering through the frost-covered glass, he saw figures moving in the distance, tall, hunched shapes that seemed to be circling the cottage. Their eyes glowed faintly in the moonlight, and they moved in strange, unnatural ways, like something not quite human. Suddenly, the door to the cottage creaked open, and Greg's blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway was the old woman, but her face was twisted into a grotesque grin, and her eyes had turned pitch black. She raised her hands, whispering words in a language Greg couldn't understand. Before he could react, the door slammed shut, and the howling outside reached a deafening pitch. He turned back to the window, his heart pounding, only to see the figures closing in on the cottage. They were too close now, their eyes glinting with an unsettling hunger. The last thing Greg heard before the darkness overtook him was the old woman's voice, faintly echoing through the cottage. "I warned you, traveler. You were never meant to leave." By morning, the village was as quiet as ever, and Greg was never seen again.